Ladies and gentlemen, Tekin.
So this is a talk about Rails and I18N. More specifically, it's a talk about why I believe understanding how I18N works can be useful to you, a Rails developer, even if you're not translating your app into other languages. I hope to demonstrate this by showing you 10 things I think are interesting about I18N and sharing some of the techniques that I think you can use, even if you're not translating your app into other languages. We'll start with a quick primer. I18N is short for internationalisation, which is the process by which you abstract your content away from your code. So this is not to be confused with localization, where you actually update your app to support other languages and regions. So whilst internationalisation is primarily a framework to aid you localize your app, it also has some useful properties that we can make use of, even if we're only serving an English-speaking audience. In Rails, we have the I18N gem, which has two main ways which we interface with it: the locale files, which sit in your app's config folder, and this is where you organize your content in one file for each language. And then there's two helper methods: translate and localize. Translate for outputting strings from your locale files, and then localize for outputting localized times and dates. Both of these are alias to just T and L in Rails views and helper modules for convenience. So that's the primer over with. Let's get on to the 10 things. Now, firstly, if you're using Rails, then you're almost certainly already using I18N, even if you don't realize it. That's because it's baked into the very heart of the framework. For example, Active Record is using I18N under the hood to construct the error messages for its validations. It does so using a series of locale files that ship as part of Active Model, which brings us neatly onto number 2. All the default error messages are overridable by you. All you need to do is replicate the same key structure, and you can provide your own phrasing for every validation that ships with Active Record. Not only can you do this globally, but you can also do it per specific attribute by nesting it under attributes and then the name of the attribute, or even for specific models and the attributes on those models. So this gives you loads of flexibility to adjust the phrasing to suit every different scenario. Number 3, as well as the individual messages, you can also override the format for the error messages. So you'll all be familiar with this construct of attribute name followed by the specific message. That's also configured in the same locale file that ships with Active Model. Now, this is actually quite a clever default for Rails to ship with. It basically means any validation you use is going to get a semi-coherent error message without you having to do a single thing, but it can lead to slightly clunky error messages. When I start a new Rails app, one of the things I will tend to do at the start is override this format and drop the attribute prefix. So this frees me up to write much more expressive error messages without that constraint. So instead of something like number of tracks must be greater than 0, we can say you must upload at least 1 track to your album. Now this obviously comes at a cost. We've dropped the attribute prefix, so now all the default messages are going to be these incomplete sentences. So I'm forced to add a custom message for every validation that I add to my system. Personally, I'm happy to pay this cost because I can be much more expressive and my app feels more user-friendly. So whilst it's not something you might consider on an existing Rails app that's got 1,000 validations that you've got to backport, maybe it's something you consider next time you run Rails new. Number 4, so that same plumbing that Active Record is using for its own validations, you can use for your custom validations as well. Here's a custom validation that's checking the validity of a bank account. And normally what you might do is add the error string directly to the error's hash like this. An alternative way to do this is to pass in a symbol to identify the message, and then you can use the same key structure to put the text into your locale file. Now I like how this makes my model code more concise, but it also removes this presentational concern, the precise wording of the error message from my model code and puts it somewhere more appropriate. Somewhere else where Rails is making use of I18N is in the form helpers, specifically the label helper methods. Normally you call one of the label helper methods and pass in the name of an attribute, and Rails by default is going to humanize this name when it outputs the label text. And if we want to override this, we can pass in an alternative label text directly to the helper method. Or you can define it in your locale file. Again, you nest it under helpers, label, your model name, and the attribute name. Again, your view code becomes a bit more concise, but you also get the added benefit of defining this label text in one place. Now, any other forms that use the same attribute are automatically going to get that label text without you having to copy around the string. I18N comes with built-in pluralization support. So this helps us output grammatically correct sentences based on the number of a thing. In English, our pluralization rules are fairly simple. We have two forms, singular and plural, but things can get a lot more complicated in other languages. I18N takes care of all this for us, and whilst we're not interested necessarily in pluralizing in Arabic, we can still use this feature to our advantage. So for example, say we want to output the string telling us the stock status of a product. Instead of a bunch of conditional logic in our view or in a helper method, we can lean on this behavior, pass in the count, and I18N is automatically going to select the right status for us. A quick one here. So as well as I18N working in all your controllers and views, it also works with Action Mailer with the added feature of letting you specify the subject lines for your emails in your locale files. So Action Mailer is automatically going to pick these out for you. Again, this removes this presentational concern from our Action Mailer code. But I think there's also like a meta benefit to this, which is you get to put all these things in one place. Same for your labels and your form error messages. It makes it a lot more accessible to non-developers. So product managers, designers are able to see them. You can check them for consistency, and it makes it easier to change them. I mentioned right up front that there's the localize method, and this is used to output localized times and dates. And this is how you would use it in your locale file. You define the formats. Here we've defined a format of short, and it uses the same date formatting structure as the strf time methods built into Ruby. In the UK, we have a relatively straightforward and sensible way of formatting our dates, which is day, month, year. Not everyone agrees with us on this, and our friends across the pond have a slightly more esoteric way they expect to see their dates, preferring month, day, year. So whilst you might not be localizing your app into other languages, perhaps if you have a lot of US customers, this is one localization you might consider so that they can see the dates in their format that they expect. So this is one way you might do that. You can define an around action which identifies the locale for the user and then passes it to I18N, and it's going to render that action with that locale applied. Here we're pulling the locale from the browser headers. Probably a better way to do this would be to have a setting in the app where they can choose specifically which they prefer. Number 9, so locale files don't just have to be YAML. They can also be Ruby, a Ruby hash like this. And Rails and I18N is going to automatically, they'll happily have both formats, and it will pick the keys depending on a set of rules, which I'm not going to go into. Why would you do this other than a burning hatred for YAML? Well, it lets you do interesting things like this. So if it's defined in Ruby, the values can be procs. So here, this is from some code in one of the apps I work on where I've defined an academic year format. And based on which side of September we're on, we're going to get the right academic year printed to the user. Now, obviously, you could have written this as a helper method. But I like the fact that now every time we're outputting a time or a date, we're using the same kind of mechanism, the localized method. It's not a combination of helpers and calling strf time and all the rest of it. So this talk has primarily been about Rails I18N, but during the course of putting it together, it got me thinking about something else. Everything I've shared with you today has been a part of Rails for well over a decade, and it's all covered in amazing detail and a whole lot more in the Rails guides on I18N. So none of this is particularly new or hidden, but it got me thinking about the fact that LLM-generated code is probably not going to make use of a lot of these techniques, at least not without very specific and explicit prompting. LLMs are generally only going to give you the averaged out, flattened version of the code that's in their training data. They're unlikely to give you anything that's outside the norms of what it's seen. And whilst none of these techniques are earth-shattering and are going to change the trajectory of the success of your app, I do think it's worth thinking about how our knowledge, our judgment, and tastes can grow and evolve the more we learn and understand our tools. Because I think our knowledge, our judgment, and our tastes are our most important leverage. Always have been and always will. So I guess my final point is stay curious. Keep learning. Keep exploring your tools and the ways you can apply them to the work that you do. And if you are going to use generative tools to help you write your software, then do leave time to explore and learn and to grow your judgment and your tastes. My name's Tekin Süleyman. I blog at tekin.co.uk. Nappy changing duties permitting, I hope to finish a blog post about all of this, so you can read it there or just read the guides. Yeah, it's got all the info there. I'm a member of the Join Together Cooperative. We work with trade unions where we design and build online join forms. The trade union movement is really important for protecting workers' rights. They've been around for hundreds of years, and it's the reason we have a 5-day working week, maternity pay, holiday pay, sick pay. With everything going on in tech, you might consider joining a union. I'm a member of the United Tech and Allied Workers Union. If you ever end up with a dispute or a problem with your employer, then that might be the support that will be really key for you. And it's a bit like insurance. You can't buy it after the fact. You have to have already been a member. There's also Prospect. They're another tech-focused union. They have a tech-focused branch. I'm slightly biased in that if you join Utah, you're going to do so using an amazing form that we designed and built. But check both out and decide which is the best fit for you. Thank you.